Hello listeners. This is the reading of the Sabbath School lesson for the fourth and final quarter of 2022.
The series is titled On Death, Dying and the Future Hope. The author is Dr. Alberto Tim, while your readers are Percy and Sibylla Harrold. Welcome to lesson number 9, titled Contrary Passages. It's ready for teaching on November 26, and I'm Percy Harrold. Thursday, November 24. The Souls Under the Altar. Read Revelation chapter 6, verses 9 to 11. How can the souls of the dead martyrs cry under the altar? Let's read Revelation chapter 6, beginning at verse 9. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer, until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed as they were was completed. The opening of the fifth apocalyptic seal reveals an unusual scene. The souls of the martyrs were seen metaphorically under the altar, crying to God for vengeance in the text we've just read. Some commentators are inclined to identify this altar as the altar of incense mentioned under the seventh seal in Revelation 8, verse 6. Let's have a look at that one. Revelation 8, beginning at verse 1. When he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. Then another angel, having a golden censer, came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, with the prayers of the saints, ascended before God from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there were noises, thunderings, lightnings, and an earthquake. So the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. But the reference to blood instead of incense in Revelation 6, 9 to 11 leads us to see here an allusion to the altar of burnt offering, where the blood of the sacrifices was poured, as we read back in Leviticus chapter 4, and first of all verse 18, And he shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar, which is before the Lord, which is in the tabernacle of meeting, and he shall pour the remaining blood at the base of the altar of burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. And verse 30, Then the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger, put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour all the remaining blood at the base of the altar. And verse 34, The priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour all the remaining blood at the base of the altar. As the blood of those sacrifices was sprinkled around the altar, so the blood of the martyrs was symbolically poured at God's altar when, by remaining faithful to the word of God and the testimony of Jesus, they lost their lives. And we read about them being faithful in Revelation 6 and verse 9. And that read, When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And then Revelation 12, verse 17, And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. The souls under the altar are also symbolic. By taking them literally, one would have to conclude that the martyrs were not fully happy in heaven, for they are still crying out for vengeance. This hardly sounds as if they are enjoying the reward of salvation. The desire for vengeance can make your life miserable, but your death as well. Also, it's important to remember that John was not given a view of heaven as it actually is. There are no white, red, black, or pale horses there with warlike riders. Jesus does not appear there in the form of a lamb with a bleeding knife wound. The four beasts do not represent actual winged creatures of the animal characteristics noted. Likewise, there are no souls lying at the base of an altar in heaven. The whole scene was a pictorial, symbolic representation, we read in the Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary, Volume 7, page 778. George E. Ladd, a non-Adventist, wrote, again sounding like an Adventist, "In the present circumstances," and he quoting Revelation 6, 9-11, "the altar is clearly the altar of sacrifice, where sacrificial blood was poured. The fact that John saw the souls of the martyrs under the altar has nothing to do with the state of the dead or their situation in the intermediate state. It is merely a vivid way of picturing the fact that they had been martyred in the name of their God." And that's from a commentary on the Revelation of John, page 103. And so to finish today, who, especially of those who have been victims of injustice, hasn't cried out for justice, which has not yet come? Why must we, by faith, trust that ultimately the justice so lacking in this world will nevertheless come? What comfort can... This lesson was read by Dr. Percy Harrold for Christian Services for the Blind. Sponsored by the Sabbath School Department and distributed through Hope Channel Australia, this podcast is also redistributed by Hope Channel Germany, Christian Record Services for the Blind. It is also available on SoundCloud and through multiple podcast distributors, including Apple iTunes. And you can listen and watch at the same time on YouTube. Remember, God is always faithful.